Hello and welcome again to everyone for joining us on the second webinar in the e-learning course series hosted by Future Climate for Africa program. This webinar is entitled How to Conduct an IPCC Review. My name is Karen Morris. I'm a Communications Officer at South North in Cape Town, South Africa, and I will be the moderator for this webinar. Our presenters today are Professor Jean-Pascal from IPCC and Dr. Leo Meyer. If you have an interest in the work of Future Climate for Africa program, please visit our website and Twitter account and get in touch with us. Just on to general housekeeping for this webinar. Our presenters today are continuing with a presentation of reviewing of the draft IPCC assessment reports. In this webinar, we cover the IPCC review process, the IPCC instructions for reviewers, effectiveness of comments, reviewing texts and drafts, and how to register as an expert reviewer. We will only be exchanging questions and answers after all presentations have been made. Attendees are asked to please submit questions via the Q&A button, which should be at the bottom of your Zoom webinar interface. When forwarding questions, please mention the particular presenter to whom you'd like to address the question to. As a facilitator, I'll be screening the questions and relaying them to the presenters verbally. We'll aim to answer as many questions as possible in the allotted time, and any questions we can't answer live, we will answer in writing following the event. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on the Future Climate for Africa YouTube channel and website. Please consider sharing it with anyone you may know who would like to view it, but couldn't attend today. With the introductions done, I now hand over to Professor Jean-Pascal, who will deal with the first part of our webinar presentations.
Thank you, Karen. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you again, maybe for those who were there on Tuesday. This is the second part of our webinar series about how to participate in the IPCC review process of its assessment report. And this webinar will be focused specifically on how to conduct an IPCC review. A short reminder, quick reminder of some key elements from webinar 1, but as Karen reminded us, the full webinar number 1 is recorded and available on the Future Climate of Africa web page, and you can have the slides and also the video from the first webinar. So I'll be very short here, just to remind that the IPCC was established in 1988, 30 years ago, by 2 UN organizations, the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme, not to do additional research on climate change, but to do something very specific, and that is to provide policymakers with an assessment, the most comprehensive, objective, open and transparent assessment of scientific, technical and socioeconomic aspects of climate change by an assessment written by teams of scientists from all continents. I mean, the last report was written by a total of 800 authors, and the quality of this series of reports the IPCC is producing comes to a large extent, not only from the quality of the authors, but also from the quality and the thoroughness of the review process in which we hope you will participate, as many of you as possible. So who are the actors in this review process? First, the expert reviewers, so potentially you, if you wish. You need to be a volunteer for that, to review part of an IPCC report at the first order draft stage or the second order draft stage. You can nominate yourself, you can register yourself. This will be explained in details a little later. But reviewers can also be nominated by NGOs, academia, IPCC observer organization, as well as by governments. The governments are the members of IPCC and those governments, when they participate to the review process, because they participate as well to the review process in a specific capacity, they review the second order draft and they also review the summary for policymakers, which is the key summary document provided at the end of the assessment cycle to policymakers. And at that time, government can consult who they want to inform them, but governments have to deliver their own set of comments in a combined set to the IPCC when they speak as governments. Then a third category of actors are very important, of course, that those are the authors of the relevant chapter, and they have to consider each review comment one by one. And they also have to justify the manner in which they take those comments into account. And those justification and responses are published together with the review comments after the assessment report or the special report has been published. And then the final categories of actors in this process are the review editors. These are senior scientists who have IPCC experience and who accompany the author teams in a friendly way, so that all substantive review comments receive appropriate consideration at the time of the writing or rewriting of the drafts. And also they have to ensure that genuine controversies and uncertainties are reflected adequately in the reports. So the review process, and this has been covered already during the first webinar, so I can be maybe a little quicker here, is in several phases. There is a first order draft with a first expert review period for 8 weeks. And this is, for example, the situation for the special report on ocean and cryosphere, with a lot of sea level scientific information is assessed. And that first order draft for that report is now open for review. Then a later review is the review of the second order draft and also a review of the first draft of the summary for policymakers. And that review process involves not only the experts, the volunteer experts, possibly you, but also for the first time the government comments. So there's one set of comments coming from governments and another set of comments coming from experts. And then the final draft of a given report is only subjected to a government review, and then that is only actually for the summary for policymakers, because there's no possibility to write another new version of the full report at that stage. What is important then is that the summary for policymakers reflects as perfectly as possible the key points of the report itself. And in this process, the authors have to respond to all review comments, and the review editors have to provide a report and sign off on the chapter they have some responsibility for, and this needs to be done before the report can be accepted by the panel. To participate in the review process, I'd like to emphasize that you don't need to be ready to review 1,000 pages. You can select one, excuse me, you can review one chapter or 2 chapters, or you can review a section, or you can even review a sub-paragraph which deals with an area you are particularly expert at. There is no obligation to review the whole report. Even though when you are an expert reviewer, you can, if you wish, have access to the whole report, so you have the context for the work you have to do. There's no lower or upper limit to the number of review comments. You can provide 1 comment, you can provide 200 comments if you have the time and enthusiasm, and both are fine. As far as government comments are concerned, as I explained, governments have to submit 1 set of comments as far as government comments are concerned, but in that process they may consult as many experts as necessary. This is a different process from the individual experts review comments which can be provided directly in the process. So there's at some point a simultaneous expert and government review process going on. It's quite common, and it's actually quite polite and useful for the expert reviewers who send their comments individually still to send a copy of their comments to the government focal point. So these can be informed about the sentiment about the document in their scientific community. And this can be very useful to give a follow-up to some of those key comments at the time of the final plenary when the summary for policymakers is discussed. Of course, all expert reviewers are acknowledged with their name and affiliation and country in the final published report. Three general principles about these reviews. The reports have to include the best possible and latest scientific findings, and of course reviewers can help the author teams to reflect all that best and latest scientific information. As many experts have to be involved as possible from all regions of the world in the IPCC process, and in the first webinar, it was emphasized that too few experts from Africa in particular had participated in some recent expert review process. So we hope that there'll be more African scientists, more African experts in the next rounds of expert reviews. Of course, the review process needs to be objective, open, and transparent, and the review process needs to keep that principle in mind, of course. So the reviewers have to keep those principles in mind. To give you an example of review comments response files, this is an example taken from the published comments and response about the Africa chapter in the working group 2 contribution, the working group dealing with impact, vulnerability, and adaptation in the 5th assessment report. And this Excel sheet is just an extract. I mean, you don't see the name of the expert or government making the comment. It's more to the left of what you see here. But you see the range of comments. I mean, look at comment number 47, for example. Someone says there should be a section on observed sea level rise trends given the number of large coastal cities that can be affected by sea level rise. And the answer of the authors is this is actually discussed in so many sections in the next draft. So this comment is clearly addressed, for example. Etc., etc. We don't have the time to look at all the comments and the answers, but you see how this is done. And in some cases, the comments are taken on board, and some cases they are rejected for good reasons by the authors, but then they have to explain why they don't accept the comment. Some elements of guidance that the IPCC in its procedures are giving to the reviewers. The purpose, as I mentioned earlier, is to help ensure that the report is as comprehensive, objective, and balanced as possible. And the reviewers can add expertise to the expertise present in the author teams. And this is why it's so important to have as many expert reviewers from all regions of the world taking part in this process. The procedures require, of course, I mean, it's understandable that the review be carried out by experts, but the definition of expert is quite open. The prospective expert reviewers, those who want to register as expert reviewers, are requested to justify their expertise and possibly their list of publication, but you don't need to be a Nobel Prize winner to participate. It's easy actually to participate to the expert review. The review is transparent up to a point. It's transparent because the comments and responses are published afterwards, but the process is not public at the time of the review. So everything is happening so that the authors can work in a climate of tranquility that's appropriate under the assumption that the review process is not public and is actually confidential. So experts who participate to the review have to sign a confidentiality agreement and of course respect it. The review comments should focus on substantive issues. Those are the most important. Should be provided in English as the universal common language that is used. I know it's, I mean, I'm French speaking myself, so I know it's not always easy to do everything in English, but this is the common language that facilitates exchange with the authors who themselves come from all parts of the world. It needs to be entered in an Excel sheet with cells for the name of the authors making the comment, the exact location, including line numbers where the comment relates to, and of course the comment itself, possibly with references, etc. The kind of constructive contributions which are particularly sought in this process are considering the structure, the comprehensiveness and balance is in chapters, including appropriate use of peer review literature. Of course, the author teams, even if they are experts and they are diverse, I mean, each chapter typically has 10 to 12, sometimes more authors, so they know a lot of peer-reviewed literature, but they might not know some key piece of literature that you know about, and you can, through the review process, bring that reference, also those references forward. Wherever possible, it's useful to be constructive and positive. Think about those authors who receive hundreds of comments from the expert reviewers. It's easier for them if you provide a suggestion for revision in terms of specific texts, and if you provide, of course, evidence from the literature as appropriate. To say that a paragraph is really unreadable and is really not to the standard that I expected is not very constructive and is not very useful. It's much more useful if you say, for example, in a much more polite way, this paragraph would be much more useful if you would include this and this reference to this and this, and maybe shorten this sentence in this way, etc. So make suggestions, don't hesitate to make suggestions. You need to give, of course, full references and citations for any suggested relevant papers. You have to consider ways of shortening the text without loss of relevant information, particularly if you are asking to add sections elsewhere. I mean, it's good to say you have to add this and that, but if you don't at the same time suggest ways to shorten the text, then it will be difficult for authors to stay within the overall page length limit that they have to observe. It's also very useful in those review comments to make suggestions, constructive suggestions, about the readability of graphical material or table material. Sometimes table material or graphical material diagrams can be very clear in the minds of the authors, but very obscure for everybody else reading it. So if you have suggestions about how to improve the presentation of that material, it's most welcome. Of course, one overall constraint that the authors have is that they have to respect the panel approved outline for the whole report and for the chapters of the report. So it's too late at the time of the review process to say, hey, there's a chapter missing or there's a whole section missing on this and that, because the authors don't have the flexibility to change the plenary approved outline. I mentioned already the page length constraints, and you have to recognize that and be aware of that. They have to provide a concise assessment of current knowledge. Their job is not to write an encyclopedia or a full scientific review about every subject or history of the science leading to the conclusions they are presented. They don't have the space and they don't have the mandate for that. So your comments need to recognize that as well. The language in the IPCC reports need to be, and it's a mantra in IPCC. We emphasize that in our first webinar. It's really a mantra of the whole of IPCC work. The IPCC documents have to be policy relevant, but they cannot, I repeat, they cannot be policy prescriptive. So every time you see in the text you review a verb like must, should, have to, in case of statements describing policy or actions, you need to be cautious and wonder whether some review comment might not be necessary, except if the sentence is phrased conditionally. So let me give an example to be absolutely clear. If you read in an IPCC text out of context this sentence, to limit the warming with a probability higher than so many %, the carbon budget must not exceed so many gigatons of carbon. This is okay because it associates a probability, and it's a conditional sentence. But if you read the second sentence, the carbon budget must not exceed so many gigatons, that is not okay, because it's policy prescriptive. It doesn't assume any level of probability. It doesn't assume a level of warming picked at decided at the political level, like in the Paris Agreement, 1.5 or 2 degrees. So it's very important to have sentences which are written in the conditional way that's appropriate for IPCC language. Also, and that's my last remark before giving the floor to Leo, who will continue, uncertainty language needs to be used properly by adding qualifiers, and those qualifiers are usually written in italics, such as likely, unlikely, very likely, extremely likely, to relevant statements when those statements need such qualifiers. And this will be discussed further in the third webinar. So I will now give the floor to Leo for the follow-up of this, for the rest of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention. Leo?
Okay, thank you. I can, we just have to switch presentations. I have to do share screen and then see if I can find the right one. I'm not quite sure what I'm presenting now. Just bear with me a couple of minutes.
It looks like the right version.
It looks like the right version. Okay, then I'll switch to presentation mode. And then let's see if I can.
Participants should know that this is version 14 already, because we have worked a lot over the past few days to prepare this presentation. So that's why it's difficult sometimes to find the right version.
Okay, I think I'm almost done. So, still the right version in front of me. It should read how to start a review of a report of more than 1,000 pages, especially for first-timers, for people who do this for the first time.
I'm sorry, Leo. Sorry for interrupting, but your screen is on presenter mode.
It is. You can't see it. I have to. So.
No, we see actually two slides, the current slide and also the next one, which is very useful for you, but not so much for the public. Yeah, this is
now?
Yeah, this is better.
That's much better. Thank you.
Then I have to turn my head now and then to look at the right presentation, but you will bear with me. Okay, again, if you have downloaded a complete report, you may just puzzle where to start. I got this question from several people. Well, first of all, you have to establish what is your expertise and what is your interest in your country, in your region, for the research that you're doing, for the policies you have to develop. whatever. And then the best thing is to start, if it's a first order draft, which you, for instance, will have for this first order draft review of the special report on climate change and land. It doesn't have a summary for policymakers yet. You will have to start with the executive summaries that each chapter will have, and just start reading them, and then sort of select what is of interest to you. Once you have established that, then you can find the correspondent pieces in the chapters itself and find the relevant sections where certain statements that hit your interest are described in more detail. What it makes it very easy is simply because they are all PDFs, and just use the search function in PDF to find the catchwords that are important to you. That is a simple way of quickly finding the parts, the texts and graphs and tables that are relevant to you. In case of a second order draft, which will be there later this year and next year, they already have a draft summary for policymakers, and that is already a lot easier to find and select, to pick and choose the issues that are of most interest to you. A summary for policymaker is normally about 20 to 25 pages. And sometimes a report also has a longer summary, which is called a technical summary, which is about 100 pages, which is already more, but you can go from the summary for policymakers, the SBM, to the technical summary, and then dive into the chapters, executive summaries, and the relevant statements. So this top-down approach with use of search functions in PDF normally helps you to identify the interesting parts. Then, when you have done that, actually, it may be repetitive in some cases what Jean-Pascal already told you. Read the text and take a look at the graphs and the tables. First of all, these are intended to be understood by the people who read it. Not all of them are indeed Nobel Prize winners and specialists. Not all of them are native speakers in English. So it is important that it is phrased in a way that you can understand it. The text, the tables, are the messages clear? And very important, are they policy relevant, and are they not prescriptive, as Jean-Pascal already explained? Do you feel that some information is missing to which you may have additional literature references? Or are there parts that could be deleted as well? So what may help to search and find what would be really, for instance, most interesting for the country you live in, that is to consult with the policy side of information, and that is United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that is not a scientific body, it's a political body. But there's a lot of information available on their website as well. For the least developed countries, which are many of them in Africa, they have the National Adaptation Action Plans, which sort of tries to highlight what is most urgent to attack with regard to adaptation to climate change. And more recently, since the Paris Agreement, we have the nationally determined contributions, and sometimes the intended nationally determined contributions. These are submissions to the convention describing a lot of things, mitigation plans, but also adaptation plans, financing, and a lot of issues that are apparently the ambitions of a certain government. And you may see if there is information available in the report that sort of supports the scientific founding of actions. A third source could be national reports that developing countries, actually all countries have to do that, but also developing countries to the Climate Convention. They consider of two parts. They have the national communications, which have to deliver it every couple of years, every 5 years, I think, and updates that have to be provided every 2 years. They give information on emission inventories, so the actual emissions that take place in the country, and also what adaptation and measures have been taken. Dus not just the plans, but also what is already being implemented. Now, once you've established your interest, you find relevant pieces in the text, then it is important to be clear what you can do with the literature sources. All IPCC reports are fully built on literature references. If you are aware of any article, as Jean-Pascal said, that could be helpful, take them up in your comments. Sometimes peer-reviewed literature is behind a paywall of commercial journals. You can get a free copy by sending a request to UNEP, now called UNEP Environment, with the e-link provided. Actually, I've made a document containing useful links with email addresses and links that is now available on the webpage of FCFA, where all information can be found. If you can't find peer literature, then also non-peer literature can be important if it is of sufficient quality. Sometimes you can get them through the technical support units of the IPCC, and sometimes you can find them themselves. And if you will add them to, if you want to add them to your comments, please give them the full reference, hopefully with a web link. Those sources can come from governments, industry, NGOs, scientific institutes. Also, non-English literature may be used, French literature for instance, provided they have a summary in English, otherwise they can't be used. Important to know that blogs or Facebook or articles in newspapers and other stuff for media and personal communications cannot be used as a source. In very few cases, exceptions can be made from newspapers if they report on something that factually happened, but that is up to the judgment of the authors indeed. Now, your comments have to be very useful, and Jean-Pascal already said a lot of it, so I can go quickly through this. Authors have little time, so make your comments as precise as possible. Give concrete text proposals if you don't like a certain text. Please note that reports tend to grow through a review, actually by 20%, while authors have page length restrictions. So if you want to add text, it's always helpful to show which parts of text are perhaps less interesting and could be deleted. And I already mentioned the literature references to give them clearly. Now, if authors have received the comments, hundreds per chapter, they are studied at elite author meetings, and after that they can be accepted, rejected, combined with other comments, and if authors don't know what to do with it, they simply say noted or thank you. There are many variations on that. You can have a look at the websites to see, but hopefully they can see something that they can really use. You can make a distinction between what they call substantive and editorial comments. That it's not always easy to see what it is, but if you find typos, etc., I wouldn't spend too much attention to it and focus as much as possible on substantive comments. As told, you cannot see during the writing of the report what the authors do with your comments, but it becomes visible once the report is published. Then the comments on the drafts are made public on the website of the IPCC. Now, let me go through some examples of what I would call a bland statements of the IPCC. These are statements which are very true, but not very effective if you read them. Let me give you just a few seconds to read this complicated sentence. Well, this is actually from the synthesis report from 2005, and it comes from working group 3. What the authors try to do in this complicated, incomprehensible sentence is to combine lots and lots of information of a lot of mitigation measures that could be done. The result is that it hardly conveys any clear message. My comment would be just come with another headline for something simple like, for instance, electricity from solar panels are now much cheaper than electricity from fuel power station, if that is correct science, I mean. But that is something that would be much clearer instead of this kind of messages. Of course, this is my personal opinion. Let me give you an opinion of what I think is a very clear and salient statement that's from Working Group 1. It's about the warming of the climate system that is unequivocal, and observed changes are unprecedented, atmosphere and oceans have warmed, etc. etc. So this is a clear, actually the word unequivocal may be a bit different. My comment on this one would be just delete the word unequivocal and replace it by clear, which means exactly the same. But for the rest, I think it's a very good statement. So don't hesitate to give comments on the use of language that everybody can understand it. Then let's go to graphics. And there is a principle called the MADE principle that I learned. If you have a graphic, does the visual communication communicate a clear message? And is it appropriate for the intended audience? And does it has evidence-based design principles? And last but not least, has the visual been tested with the audience? Well, the audience, that's basically you. Let me give you one example of a graph of Working Group 3 in 5th assessment, which is extremely complicated. And it took many people a lot of time to understand it. Don't try to do this right now. You just see a lot of information that also is tried to get together in one graph, but it's hardly legible and you don't see the key message. A good example is actually a graph that never was published officially, but it was used extensively in communications. It's about the amount of carbon budget that we still would have for reaching a 2 degrees goal, given it was from data from 2011, and with the 66% chance to stay below 2 degrees. You see a pie, a part of a pie that is already used, and a part that is still there. This is what I think is a clear message, and you can ask for clear messages like that. Then there are the mechanics of the reviewing, how exactly to register. I won't do this in detail. You will find a document with a step-by-step instruction on the website of FCFA. You have to register, you will get a username and password. You have to indicate your expertise, you have to agree to be confidential, and comments need to be in English, and you have to adhere to the deadlines, which are very, very strict. But please consult the web page of FCFA, where you can find a step-by-step instruction. That is especially for the special report on climate change and land that will actually start next Monday. You can already register. The chapters are not yet there. They will be posted on Monday. Some final messages to conclude. Expert reviewers are key to the quality of IPCC, and so it's you can add regional information and local information that is still missing. The government reviews are also critical because they can check the policy relevance and whether there are no political biases and if it's really useful for IPCC assessments. Don't be shy to be accepted as an expert reviewer. As Jean-Pascal said, you don't need to have won a Nobel Prize, but you should specify your interest and your expertise related to the chapters. But you don't need to submit published peer-reviewed literature references. You can check with the useful links on the FCFA site, as mentioned, where you can find the link to register. I think we have come to the end almost, just to have to mention shortly 2 disclaimers. What we have presented here is from our side as former people working with the IPCC and from a Future Climate for Africa program. What we do and what we say, we are not responsible for what IPCC decides themselves, and conversely, they cannot be held responsible for what we present. We hope you will participate as reviewer, but it will be up, of course, to the authors of the report what to do with the comments they receive. That is not up to us. Having said that, thank you for your attention. We will start shortly with Q&A sessions. And please note that if your questions are pop up later in your head, and you want to have, you take a look at the recorded version or at the slides, and you have some questions, please send your questions to info@south-north.org. Before the 15th of June, please. We can handle them and give them some attention at the next webinar, the third one, which is on the 19th of June. And that third webinar, to mention that shortly, that will probably go on outstanding questions from your side. It will go in more detail on an important aspect of reviewing, that is dealing with uncertainties and robustness of statements, and also what are specific issues of interest for the African continent. Thank you very much. Now go back to Karen, and I will stop the sharing. Karen, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much, Leo and Jean-Pascal, for your handling your presentations. I will now verbally forward all the questions that we've received so far. The one question we've had through the chats is, do regional economic communities like the Southern African Development Community participate, since they are intergovernmental and all our countries are members of the IPCC?
Do you want to take it, Leo?
I think so, because all governments will have received, at least for those reviews that are for governments, will have received information from the Secretariat, and all observer organizations will have received information about the review of the first order drafts as well. But I'm not sure. Maybe Jean-Pascal, you know a better answer.
Well, one would need to see if they are on the list of observer organizations, and I don't know the full list. It's a very long list, actually. I don't remember having heard them speaking, at least, or seeing their flag at an IPCC meeting, but to be sure, one would have to consult the list of observer organizations, which is on the IPCC website.
Yeah. We can take a look at this briefly after this meeting, and Karen, maybe you can add this to the Excel sheet with the unanswered questions, and then I can spend some time in finding the right answer. Next.
Okay. Yes. Next question. Just clear here. Climate finance is one of the major problems, especially in developing countries. What further effort will the UNFCCC and IPCC make in this regard?
Can I take it, Leo?
Please, go ahead.
We'll start. Well, as we explained extensively at the first seminar, the role of IPCC is to advise UNFCCC and policymakers of the world about all questions related to climate change, including climate finance. But it's not the role of IPCC to take any decisions about those subjects. But the IPCC has repeatedly tried to assess the available estimates about, for example, the needs in terms of climate finance, to the extent those needs were published and addressed either the cost of mitigation or the cost of adaptation. So the IPCC is assessing that information and providing that assessment as part of its reports through to UNFCCC and all its members.
Okay, what's next? Karen, you're unmuted. Could you explain what?
Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next question, which came in via email.
Okay.
Is there a minimum of publications required for one to be selected as a reviewer? If yes, how many publications?
Okay, can I take that one? Yes. There is no obligation to have any publication. If you have them, you're asked to put them on your registration file, but no more than 5 publications. But if you have no publications, it doesn't matter, you just fill out none. So there is no obligation to have any publication at all to become an expert reviewer.
I would still add that if there was any hesitation about the seriousness of your candidacy, for example, there have been in the past journalists or members of the media who registered for reviews, and of course they cannot participate to the review process because that would be a breach of confidentiality, and so their participation to the review process is usually rejected. So if there was any doubt about your expertise, I mean, having publications would certainly help. So it's better to have publication, but it's not an absolute requirement.
Thank you, Jean-Pascal. There's another question that came through. What are the key factors the IPCC considers in the selection process of reviewers?
Can I take that one?
Yeah, please.
Normally there is no selection. There may be very few occasions where, for instance, people are not serious. And I remember having a long list of prospective expert reviewers, and of the thousands of names I've seen, there may have been one who didn't give any detail, who didn't have a serious email address, etc. So that one was rejected. So normally all those people that register that want to be an expert reviewer will be expert reviewer, and they will receive access details, and if they have to sign the confidentiality agreement, etc.
So a cause for rejection might be someone who would have breached the confidentiality agreement in a previous occasion, for example. That's an example, but it doesn't happen very frequently. It's actually very rare.
I haven't seen it in my experience in the last 15 years with the IPCC, actually. Okay. So normally, don't hesitate to register, even if you don't have any scientific publication on your name, as long as you have a keen interest in the subject. Next question.
Okay. The next one is the African Union having any role in IPCC meetings or reviews?
Yeah, would you take it, Jean-Pascal?
Yeah, well, it's a little bit the same question as the Southern African Development Community. I don't think the African Union has an observer status.
Oh yes, they have. They are.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen them several times at plenary meetings.
Okay, good.
And also, and they have been also quite active behind the scenes in some cases.
Okay, good. And then I withdraw. But it's a matter of being an observer, having the observer status or not, and I'm happy they have. Yeah.
But if they really have submitted as African Union review comments, I wouldn't know.
Next question. Is it necessary for lead authors to interact with government agencies during the review process?
Can I take that?
Yeah, sure.
Authors are independent. They don't need to, they interact with each other, how to best deal with certain criticism and comments. And they have to deal with the review editors who oversee the process, that they do an honest job and give adequate attention to reviews. So no, there's no need for them to consult entities outside the review process itself. In some cases, they may want to contact an expert reviewer to ask for some clarification or a question that they may have. That may happen. And in the past, in some exceptional cases, also meetings have been organized between authors and expert reviewers, and some expert reviewers to have a more face-to-face interaction on questions.
Thank you, Leo. There's another question. What is the chance of an expert with no experience to be selected by IPCC for the first order draft reviewing?
Okay, I think that already has been answered. No experience is required. You need to fill out the form and indicate your area of interest. There is no list of qualifications you have to adhere to in order to consider yourself an expert. You have to self-declare that you are an expert, and we will then, IPCC will assume then that is serious. And if it's for a first time, then it's the first time. That's perfect. You're most welcome, I think.
Okay, thank you. Let me just see if there are any more.
I think that maybe some, and this is related to a question I see about email issues in the question list, saying invalid email when trying to register. I guess that having an institutional email address, from an email address attached to a university, a research center, or recognized NGO helps to be recognized. If it's just a standard generic Gmail address or whatever, probably the suspicion might be a little higher that this might be, a journalist trying to get access to the documents. And in that case, having a publication, a list of publication, certainly help to balance the different kinds of information. So
maybe we have to come back to. Maybe we have to come back to that, because I know that a lot of people, especially in Africa, have to use Gmail or Yahoo emails because they're the only ones that really function. And so far, in my experience within the IPCC, we didn't refuse people who had a Gmail or a Yahoo or other account.
But there's a question about that.
There may be yes, I know. There may be technical reasons that normally should be explained by the technical support unit who handle these things. So in case you are a serious reviewer and you get a message your email address is rejected, I would recommend you to contact the technical support unit related to it. For the special report on land, for instance, it will be working group 3. For the special report on cryosphere and oceans, it's working group 2, I believe. Yes. And if you need email addresses or whatever, that kind of help or contact details, just let us know. We will help you.
Okay. We have another question, which actually follows on a comment that was made via the question and answer. And forgive me if this has already been answered. But the question is, being authors or expert review, is it a volunteering work or a paid one?
The IPCC doesn't pay anybody except those working in the technical support units, which are paid by the country where the TSU is located and the country funding that TSU. But the authors work for free, the management of the IPCC, the elected officials work for free, and so the expert reviewers work for free as well. The payment, quote unquote, is in terms of reputation, in terms of having participated to a Nobel Prize winning organization work, and also through the opportunities to extend one's network, one's scientific network, and possibly expertise as well, by being in contact through this process with an assessment process that is really so important and so close to the best scientific information.
May I add to that one point? That is that, as I said, the names, affiliation, and countries of expert reviewers are published in an annex to the report. And those reports come on the internet. That means you can add that qualification to your CV and your name, and it will appear in Google search if people want to find out more about you. So it gives you some extra visibility as an expert in this world.
To a certain extent, it's the same as a scientific publication. I mean, usually nobody is paid to publish a scientific paper in a scientific publication. The payment, in quote unquote, is in terms of scientific visibility, as Leo just mentioned.
Yes, and hopefully the person already gets a salary for being a scientist or an NGO person somewhere.
Hopefully.
Okay, what's next?
I think we have time for one more question. It is local or endogenous knowledge may be important for climate adaptation. How flexible is the reporting to accommodate with this kind of information?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Those sources are enormously important. However, it is important to make sure that it is of sufficient scientific quality. And that is, of course, a bit subjective. Normally what happens if a reviewer submits a certain gray report, which is not peer-reviewed, and then the authors will have to judge, is this a serious source, and then they can use it. Let me give you an example from my own practice where we did not use it. At a certain moment, we got a photograph of a poster presented at some meeting with some graphs about some equipment that had to do with fossil fuels. And the person in question wanted us to publish that photo. And we said, well, this is a graph, this is a photograph from a poster. We can't consider this as a scientific publication of sufficient quality. And so in some cases we had to refuse, when I was with the IPCC, certain sources. The same holds also for messages, information from social media or for some web sources. So there is, but it is in the hands, by the end of the day, of the author teams what or not to accept. But don't feel shy to add your sources to what you want the authors to see. Then they can judge to take it up or not. Good.
Okay.
I think we still have two questions. Is there still some time to do the rest? I mean, if we make it a few minutes later, would that be possible?
Well, we have 1 more minute, but let's see whether any other questions can be addressed. Okay, there's another one that came through the chat. It says, would a reviewer be allowed to support his review comments based on his personal research findings, even when these findings are not yet published?
That's a tricky one. Of course, the person can add whatever can comment on whatever he or she wants, but you cannot refer to an article that is not yet accepted for publication. Once an article is accepted for publication but not yet published, yes, then you can refer to it, because normally it can be obtained through some courses. But if an article is not accepted or not accepted yet for publication, or if it's still in review, then authors cannot use it, unfortunately. It's important to know that IPCC has set deadlines for that, because sometimes there's still time. And if your publication comes out, say, in a couple of months, and it can still be taken into account in the final version, then that's fine. In that case, you would have to consult also with technical support units, and maybe we can be helpful to find out deadlines for publication that may be important to you. Okay?
Okay. All right, thanks. And I think that covers it. Thank you very much once again, Leo and Jean-Pascal, for your presentations.
Goodbye, everyone.
We'd just like to remind everyone that the recording of this webinar and the presentation and Q&As will be published on the Future Climate for Africa website. Thank you once again for joining us.
What about the poll?
Yes, I was going to launch that in a few minutes. Once we sign off, it would be great to get your feedback on our webinars. Please take a minute to complete the poll that I will launch. It will be up for about a minute or so, and it would be great if we can get your feedback with regards to this webinar. Thank you very much once again for joining us, and we hope that you will join us on the 19th for the third webinar in this series.